We're going to be talking about anxiety disorder through the lens of neurodiversity, which normally includes dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, but also includes things like Tourette's, possibly OCD, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and we'll be looking at how these interweave and interlink. Interested to find out more about the difference between anxiety and anxiety disorder? Great, and we are going to be talking about that as well, because there is a difference. I talk about it every week, but if you've never been to us before, we're exceptional individuals. We support people from all backgrounds, and we specialize in getting neurodiverse individuals into high-end employment and supporting organizations with awareness and understanding. So we're going to be answering, if I haven't already mentioned it, I'm Nat, the head of community at Exceptional Individuals. We're going to be tackling the question, do I have anxiety disorders? And we aren't walking away with a diagnosis today. I'm not qualified to do that. But what we are going to be doing is asking the questions which are normally asked in order to provide a diagnosis and to see the overlap between, am I just an anxious person? Am I just a neurodiverse person? Or am I most? I do have our anxiety mascot, Piglet. So yeah, Piglet will be joining us today. And for those of you who do not know, there's a long-held rumor that all of the Winnie the Pooh characters are based on individual mental health conditions. Rabbit's got OCD, Winnie the Pooh, I think has forgetfulness, Owl has dyslexia, Tigger has ADHD. Whether or not, Sally says Eeyore has depression. Whether or not there's truth in that, I'm not sure. But I thought, while there's a Piglet available, might as well have him join the conversation. Now, let's look at the symptoms first. The symptoms are as followed, and I'm going to ask you a range of questions. Now, the quickest definition, just to get everyone on the page, is the difference between anxiety and anxiety disorder. Anxiety is something we all experience. It is part of the human condition, just like we all get depressed. Well, that doesn't mean we all have depression. Anxiety is this feeling of being overwhelmed or being unable to manage those emotions at that time. And it can come up unexpectedly, but it's also something that comes and goes and passes. Typically, it is related to a life experience, maybe, bereavement, maybe an exam, something along those lines. Or it can be related to living as a neurodiverse person in a neurotypical world. Yet anxiety disorders, on the other hand, and we say disorders because there is a whole heap of them, is a mental illness. And this one, it impacts you in a big way. It could be that you do not want to leave the house because you're so anxious about the unknown, or maybe it's you've got OCD and it's not that you're just cleaning a lot, it's that you're doing it to the point where your hands are bleeding. It's that next step up. It's a very severe and real thing. So we're going to be kind of taking them apart because it can get blurry sometimes. Sunjan, I always wondered about Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, no, we've I don't know if you can see on the camera, I've got the whole Winnie the Pooh crew over there. He's a forgetful bear, but a lovely one. I'm not sure what kangaroo have. Anyway, is anxiety neurodivergent? This is the question I want to ask all of you first. Yes, no, depends. Spoiler, there isn't exactly 100% correct answer, but I am going to give you an answer today as not to seem like a cop-out. I don't know about you, but that little gif of Piglet is giving me anxiety. Okay.
I think, hi, it's Fazana. It depends on whether. No, I say it's not, because it can happen to people who aren't neurodiverse. So, no, it depends. I think it depends on the situation.
No, thanks, Susanna, and great to have you back as always. The answer that we're going to go with today, at least, and feel free to challenge me on this, is no, it is not. And the reason why I say it is not is very much like for Zana. You can have it and not be neurodivergent. It's a very much like an illness, having anxiety disorder, but also it's like an extra. It's not a neurodivergence. The reason why it might be depends is that it is very likely to be a +1. So if you have neurodivergence, you're very likely to have anxiety, but they're not one and the same. Neurodiversity is all about the fluctuation of abilities, having really high strengths in some areas and challenges in others, where anxiety doesn't quite offer that advantage. There is an advantage, though, to anxiety in general, and that could be safety, that could be about being wearing, about protecting yourself. However, it comes with neurodivergent conditions. Absolutely, Sunjan. Sally says, don't think it is, but if you're neurodivergent, then you're vulnerable to it. Absolutely. So I would say if anyone asks you, officially, no, it is not, but does it come as part of the package? Unfortunately so. So now on to neurodiversity and anxiety. If anxiety isn't neurodivergent, how does it exactly link in and relate? And we're going to be looking at a few stats and statistics that came from the ADAA. So 1 in 5 autistic adults may have an anxiety disorder, 1 in 5. That's really high. That's 2 times the average population who aren't autistic. So again, you cannot be autistic and have anxiety, but you are more likely to have anxiety if you're autistic. Is this inherently part of the condition that's kind of baked into it? Or is this because of the social impact of living in a world that just isn't created for your mind? Probably the latter, but we do not know conclusively. 3.5% of adults have OCD, that's obsessive compulsive disorder. And you might wonder, is OCD anxiety disorder? Is it the same thing? Well, it used to be, but it affects you so severely and differently that it is now its own separate condition or disorder. And think of it like you have anxiety, then you could have like OCD and then anxiety disorder. It's not, you can't really rank them like that, but if you were to, that's how I would put it. 50% of adults with ADHD have co-occurring anxiety disorders. That's incredibly high. I think it's something like 60 or 80% have a co-occurring something else, but of that, 50% have an anxiety disorder. And nearly 50% with Tourette's may also experience anxiety problems. So it is not just me saying this. There are stats and statistics to back this up. You are very, very likely to have anxiety as a neurodiverse person, but you're also fairly likely to have an anxiety disorder. So do you often feel restless, the feeling of impending doom, increased heart rate, breathing rapidly? And please, please, please keep in mind that we are coming from this from a long-term perspective. This is something you feel on a nearly daily basis, something that stops you from living your best life, something that has affected you for 6 months or more. It can be quite difficult unless you're keeping like a journal or a diary to know this, but keep this as like a vague idea, because we all feel restless from time to time. We all feel the sky is falling every now and then, but this is something that affects you daily, if not nearly daily. Sally says, I don't think it is, but if, oh yeah, my anxiety gives me nausea. That is very common, that butterfly feeling. So select the ones that you feel on a daily basis. Restless, most people, the feeling of doom. It sounds kind of cartoony, but it's a real feeling that everything's going down the, going down the drain. Increased heart rate, that shows you that it's interesting that those 2 are the highest ones, because one is a mental thing, so the feeling, and the other is a physical reaction, because that's another thing. It affects both physical and mental. Knots in the stomach, pretty much, yeah. Yamina says pounding headache and chest pain. Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it normally affects both physical and mental. It's one of those things where the pain is very much real, though if you were to go to the doctor, they probably wouldn't find anything. And it can make it very difficult to get diagnosed or to get help initially. The next kind of set of questions is, tell me if you strongly agree with these or strongly disagree. I experience on a regular basis, remember regular is near enough daily or every other day, sweating, trembling, feeling weak or tired, trouble concentrate or thinking about anything than the present worry. And again, we all sweat on a daily basis, but I'm not talking like Prince Andrew sweat kind of here. This is unnecessary sweating, sweating from worry, sweating from stress, trembling where you kind of get that like butterfly feeling, weak or tired. And last one, trouble concentrating or worrying about anything. This can quite relate to OCD when you have obsessive compulsive thoughts where those thoughts keep entering your brain and no matter how hard you try, they keep kind of flowing back. I see a lot of you have that, and that is one of the biggest characteristics of anxiety disorder. Because remember, we all feel anxious, but if it's affecting you continuously and if it's something which is always there, then that becomes a disorder. And yeah, it's good. And I would say sweating is one of the more rarer ones to have that kind of extreme physical response, but you might have a more subtle one, like feeling a bit clammy. How sensitive are you to the following? We know when it comes to neurodivergence that sensitivity to sensations like noise, light, smell, and touch are very, very common, particularly in like autism. But it also affects anxiety disorder. And at the moment, it looks like we've got a good all-rounder. So a lot of us are sensitive to noise is the leading one. Touch, yeah, smell. And this becomes, when you have like extreme anxiety, it can really heighten your senses. And let's say if you've got like ASD or autism, and you're already quite sensitive to these experiences. Well, if you're sensitive, that means that you find it normally displeasurable, not always, but a lot of the time, to these heightened senses. And that will naturally cause anxiety. But if you have anxiety for a prolonged period of time, that can significantly hurt your mental well-being and can can develop into a disorder. So you can kind of see the link where you can absolutely be neurodivergent and not have anxiety, but the chances of you developing anxiety disorder is very high because your brain is continuously working against the system. And this can also work in things like dyslexia, maybe not as much, but definitely somewhat. My next question for you all is, what makes you experience anxiety?
I'll say social situations.
Yeah, social situations. Anything that kind of triggers people.
Meeting new people or special occasions.
Yeah, I think any sort of thing where you've got to interact with people. And there are multiple types of anxiety disorders. So social anxiety is very much a real thing where you might avoid going out in places where you know you're likely to see people. I know for myself, I'd much rather go to a place where I know I don't know anyone. I'm actually fine in public. It's when I meet people I know that I feel the most anxious, which in some ways doesn't make much sense because you'd think you feel more at ease with people who already know your background. We've got some interesting ones here. Public speaking. Public speaking is the biggest fear in the UK and I think in America and actually in most of the world. Interesting, right? Salia says rejection. Yeah, of course, we're all difficult. It can be very difficult to put yourself out there because each time you get rejected, it kind of knocks you down even further. And the uncertainty is killing me, not knowing what's going to happen. Darla says being evaluated or tested. Yeah, you're continuously thinking way in depth. We've got pressure, talking with strangers. I mean, good advice not to do, but I know what you mean. Exams, rejection, meeting people, family situations, communications, uncertainty, tasks due, speaking up. Most of these are related to social anxieties, ones where it's about being with someone. There are others, including related to like your habits, like eating, or it could be being in small spaces. It could be like phobias. It could be a mountain of stress. But with a lot of these would all count as just having anxiety because they're triggers which make you feel uneasy. They are somewhat rational. It's a very rational thing to be anxious. But if you're starting to think, I don't really know why I'm anxious, I'm just always kind of on edge, that more indicates anxiety disorder. You can obviously have anxiety disorder and know the root cause, but it is more classified for like the unknown. And it's nice to see such a broad variety because we really are all different. This one says, how do you find identifying your own and other people's emotions? So on here, you either think super easy, barely an inconvenience, or near impossible. I just cannot do it. So this is just, are you able to read yourself and other people? Do you know, like, can you tell if someone's feeling anxious? Are you quite aware when someone is reluctantly happy? Those kind of like micro emotions. Sally says, I can identify my emotions, but not someone else's. Yeah, it could be one or the other, definitely. And these are things that we normally relate to neurodiversities, again, very common for autism, Asperger's. And that is a very natural part, but it also affects anxiety. And the way I see it is, we all know what like happy looks like, what sad looks like, but it's those kind of like micro expressions, like happy with reservations, those kind of slight expressions. And when you're really anxious, or when you've got a lot of other things going on in your head, like obsessive compulsive thoughts, those things can kind of get muted a little bit, and it can be a lot harder to read people. Some people experience anxiety or anxiety disorder and not even know. And this is something that I've experienced firsthand. You could go to the doctor and you've got all the characteristics, all the symptoms of dealing with severe anxiety. Yet when they ask you, are you stressed about anything at the moment? You're like, no. And you really can't see what your anxiety is about. It seems like, how can you not know your own emotions? But it's a very real thing that a lot of people struggle with. I don't know for everyone, but I know with myself, it was because I was stressed for such a long period of time that it kind of like compressed. And that kind of feeling of anxiety was all my brain could remember. So even when I had like a quiet patch in my head, my brain was still kind of on standby, kind of like prepared for the next bout of stress. So very interesting. And interestingly, it's about 50-50 almost on this. So some of us can find it very easy, some can find it not so easy. Those with autism can find it difficult quite a lot of the time. Those without normally find it fairly easy. But if you have anxiety disorder, you're probably somewhere nearer the middle. What do you prefer? Do you prefer predictability and routine, so the mundane of life, or do you prefer spontaneity and adventure? Maybe you're going on an adventure. So are you your run-of-the-mill Hobbit, or are you your Bilbo Baggins? Anxiety disorder definitely has a preference for predictability and routine. You like the fact, when you've got to get up each day, you know what to expect. There's no unknowns. There's no kind of hidden dangers. If you're the type of person who just, see what happens, that isn't very characteristic of anxiety disorder. I think with all things, it is possible to be adventurous and still have anxiety disorder, but you might want to ask yourself, are you adventurous despite having the anxiety disorder? Because sometimes we can do things even though it's a hard challenge. For example, it's hard for a dyslexic to read sometimes, but that doesn't mean that they have to hate books. Or you might be dyscalculic, but actually still enjoy maths. You might be autistic, but still really enjoy socializing. So you can have both. but what is like the natural feeling inside? Like, is it naturally something that fills you with dread? Or does the same old feel quite therapeutic? This is very much with most anxiety disorders. The unknown is not appreciated. So you can probably see there are a lot of similarities between this and, say, autism, because it is continuous, where if you're just feeling anxious for a day, you might just want to stay in bed, but next week you'll probably be fine. So there is like a clear difference. Sanjan says, I like both, but I prefer adventure on my terms, not others. And yeah, that might be a bit more like a mild case because it's still adventurous, but there's less variables. You trust yourself and you can control within good reason what you get up to. So it doesn't feel as random. Jane says, like predictable adventures. Yeah, I could see that. So I think Jane and Sanjan, you're quite similar, actually. You don't mind, the thrill of life, as long as it's on your terms. Sally's the same. When thinking about it, I like routines and planning, but I do want to be adventurous, but I really can't. Yeah, and I think that's okay. If you ask someone, do you like being adventurous? They will always say yes, almost, because who wants to sound like they aren't adventurous? Doesn't sound that fun, right? But it doesn't mean that you can't be adventurous. It just means that you might find it harder than the average person because of that kind of like mental baggage that you're carrying along with you. So never ever think, just because you've been slapped with a label, that the things it says you struggle with are things that you cannot do. You absolutely can do them, but it may require a bit more mental stamina in order to achieve them or fulfill them like typical minded individuals. Okay, now we're going to look at types of anxiety, because we've been saying anxiety disorders and not anxiety disorder, because it's a convoluted mess of terms. It's like saying anxiety disorders is like saying neurodiversities or neurodivergence. There's lots underneath that umbrella, and they're all can be very different from each other. So just kind of think of those terms as like quite similar as umbrella terms rather than diagnoses. Now, I do not have time to explain all of them today, but here are some of the most common ones. Agoraphobia, anxiety disorder due to medical conditions, generalized anxiety disorder, which is the more common one, panic disorder, sensitive misms, separation anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, also known as social anxiety, specific phobias, so it might be spiders, might be lemons, whatever you're scared of, but not just scared of, what actually limits you from doing your day-to-day life. Substance-induced anxiety disorder. Again, that is still an anxiety disorder, even though it's not the one that might naturally think of. And other specified anxiety disorders and unspecified anxiety disorders. So those ones at the end kind of like scoop up any unmentioned ones, but these ones up here are the most common. So if someone says, do you have a phobia? It's not just something that kind of freaks you out a little bit. It's something that can be quite debilitating. So some people might not like spiders. Other people might not be able to enter the room, and that when it's interfering with your life. Now, okay, great, Nat. You've confirmed in my head that I probably may very well have an anxiety disorder, and I'm kind of certain it's not just bog standard anxiety. Should I get help? Well, if in doubt, it's always good to seek support and get a proper medical profession's opinion. But we're going to go over some good questions, because obviously we don't want to overrun the NHS, but it's also better not to suffer in silence. So these are just some of the questions which are always good to ask yourself whether or not it's worth seeking medical help if these are things that you strongly resonate with for a prolonged period of time. So the first one is, worry is interfering with my work/relationship. Is it almost impossible to hold down a stable relationship without self-destructing? The next one, my worry is upsetting to me and difficult to control. Are you actually getting down by it? Like, of course, being anxious is not a great feeling, but is it to the point where you are getting depressed because of your anxiety? You start to hate yourself because you aren't able to do the same things as other people. I feel depressed, trouble with alcohol and drugs. Do you find that you're using different substances or methods to numb the pain? So maybe you have social anxiety and the only way you can relax is to drink. Or maybe you need drugs in order to calm you down or hype you up. Those are the issues which it's not a healthy way of dealing with it. They're like a short-term answer, but long-term, it's going to cause you more trouble than it's worth. You can also get anxiety from coming off of alcohol or drugs or medication. Even anxiety medication, you can get anxiety through coming off of it. And this is why you normally like lower your dose. So you might have like 200 milligrams and 150 milligrams and eventually 50, you kind of break it down bit by bit. But this is something which I highly suggest you speak to your doctor about and do not do yourself because, obvious reasons. I think my anxiety could be a physical problem. Do you ever wonder that it's due to something else? So it's not in your head, it's because you've actually got like a tumor or your stomach, there's something internally wrong with you. Having health anxiety is something that I've experienced with, and it is bad because you are so convinced there's something physically wrong with you. You've had CAT scans, you've had MRI scans, you've been to the doctors, you've had every test unknown, nothing comes up. And yet you still really struggle to believe the doctor when they say it's not there. And lastly, you have suicidal thoughts. Now, for this one, this is your big extreme. So if you had said yes all the time to any of these, then I highly suggest you go see a doctor. Maybe on this one, you might think that you're terrible in relationships and work. But like if you're really terrible. But if you have suicidal thoughts, for example, stop right now, phone 111 if you're in the UK and book a doctor's appointment, because that isn't a normal feeling and this is something which you should address. So I can see some of you have felt that way sometimes, but if it's like a continuous feeling or a very regular feeling, please do get help. Sally here says, I had an anxiety attack from a health problem a couple of years ago, not helped by the internet. Yeah, the internet can be a very damaging place. My doctor actually recommended that I am banned from Googling my symptoms because I was going into like scary internet psycho mode where I was researching every condition. They say all roads lead to Rome. Well, all health articles lead to cancer and death. Everything you Google will automatically lead to the worst thing possible. So do not trust the internet. You are not a medical professional, and the articles you're reading may not be written by a professional, or if they are, they might be written in a way which you could misunderstand. So again, even today's webinar, see it as a starting point, an initial block to build upon, and not your go-to guide for whether or not you need support or not. My general advice would be, if in doubt, seek support, particularly on the last one. Now for the causes. So we've looked at the definitions, the differences, we've looked at the symptoms, we've looked at when to get support, but what actually causes it? Because we know neurodiversity is something you are born with and die with, but is anxiety disorder or anxiety? Well, we know there's definitely a cause to anxiety, but what about the disorder part of it? Let's dive down deep. So my first question to any of you is, do you have any of these medical problems? Maybe you have a heart disease, diabetes, thyroid problem, respiratory disorder, drug misuse. Maybe you're currently withdrawing from medication, or do you have chronic pain? And this question was asked because this is kind of one like you're working backwards on. A lot of the time, prolonged anxiety can be an underlying factor to a physical medical problem. It might be that you have an unknown heart disease or thyroid problem. And if you're experiencing extreme anxiety, you might, for instance, say, I'm not going to go to the doctor because it's only anxiety, or because some people do not take it as serious. You really should. I'm not trying to scare anyone, but anxiety is a very strong initial symptom or characteristic of some of these problems. Not always, definitely not, but wouldn't you rather know? So do not suffer in silence. Do not think this is something you'll just get over, because anxiety disorder or prolonged anxiety isn't something that just disappears. If it is happening to you, like I said, they normally say about 6 months or more. I personally think, why wait that long? Maybe 3 months or more. That's a personal decision. Do not take my advice for it. But as long as it's more than a couple of days, then I think it's a safe bet to seek further support. And he says, I suffer from PCOS and that causes the sugar levels to spike. Oh, no, thanks. And Sally also has diabetes. Actually, 3 people in our office does, which shows you how common it really is. Sally says, I would say there is danger of developing diabetes rather than having diabetes. Yeah. I mean, I am not an expert on that, but I'm definitely learning a lot from all of you in the office on that. Which of these statements do you agree with? I have blood relatives with an anxiety disorder. So people you are biologically related to that have already known if they have an anxiety disorder. You had a known anxiety disorder as a child. You avoid situations because of anxiety. So you purposely will not go to certain locations, for example. I get sudden anxiety that is unrelated to life. So no triggers, you just fine anxiety. Or maybe it could be like a slow build-up, but there isn't an exact cause. Or I have a previous history of anxiety. Oh, we got some interesting things here. Says the root cause of anxiety might be because of PCOS. Interesting. Chronic illness can cause anxiety disorder because living with it long-term. Sanjan, absolutely. Unfortunately, it can definitely develop through all of that baggage that you carry with you from around. This is why if you are stressed, look after yourself. Take some time off work if you are, or relax, do what you can, because you might think it's like not a big deal, but you would not want it to develop into something far more severe. Yamina says, I don't really believe my doctor. It might be that, and maybe the way my family raised me. Yeah, it very much can be sociological, biological. So the classic nature versus nurture. It very much can be both. Some people say it could do like due to pollution in the air. Others could be the way you were raised. It could be the culture you're born into, a whole lot of things. Now, for these ones here, the reason why I ask these questions, which of these statements do you agree with, is that if you agree with all of them, you're at a far higher risk of having or developing anxiety disorder. Blood relatives, because it's hereditary, so it runs in families. If someone in your family has it, the likelihood is you might be more prone to it due to genetic reasons. You've had it as a child. Remember, it's not a consistent continuum. It can fluctuate. So depending on your life, it can bring certain emotions back, and it can come and it can go, but not rapidly. That would just be anxiety. Anxiety disorder can be heightened in different parts of your life. I avoid situations. So not just the one-off, like, oh, I can't be bothered to do that work social tonight. If it's something you've had consistently done, I get sudden anxiety that's unrelated to life. This is a real big indicator. Anxiety disorder, as I've said before, does not have to be completely tied or anchored to a particular cause. It just is. And last one, I have a previous history. Obviously, if you've had a history, you've got proven facts that it can happen again. Sunjan has just says, COVID and long COVID set off anxiety and depression bouts in me. I think COVID, that kind of anxiety, that change of pattern, that kind of changing your life and now having to change it again has brought on a lot of social anxiety, also a lot of anxiety about leaving the house. It's changed our world quite a lot. And this really, I wouldn't say nicely, but does tie in with neurodiverse conditions like autism, where change isn't always welcomed. What are some risk factors? So things that can make it more likely or more prone to getting an anxiety disorder. So on here, what do you have experience with? Trauma, definitely trauma can do it for you, whether in childhood or even in later life. Relatives with anxiety disorder, stress buildup. Remember how I said you might go to the doctor and say you're not currently stressed, but you can still have anxiety. That's because of the buildup, and you might not be stressed, but your muscles, everything going on in your head is still very much like compressed. Stress due to illness. Yeah. These are all things that if you experience for prolonged time, they can lead to an anxiety disorder. I'm not saying, they guarantee it or just having it for a short time will, but if you have it for a long time and you aren't seeking support or remedies or things to ease it, then it definitely does heighten the likelihood. Having anxiety disorder does more than make you worry. Rank what affects you most. So all of these things are tied to an anxiety disorder. The myth that it is just about worrying too much, being a piglet, is not true. So what is something which either is the most common in your life or affects you to the point which is debilitating, which stops you from doing what you love? Okay, we've got depression, most popular one. I think there is a massive thing with depression at the moment, and I would not be surprised if a lot of us was on antidepressants. Trouble sleeping, very, very common, particularly in those with ADHD. There's a massive connection between insomnia and ADHD, as well as anxiety, because that's your brain cannot switch off. It's just continuously fixated on something. Digestion problems, not having a great appetite, or maybe you're eating too much. Headaches, I'm actually surprised that one's not higher, to be honest. Headaches are really common. That's definitely one that I've had trouble with in the past. And last one, substance misuse. Though it isn't as common, it is very, very severe because it's a downhill spiral. So if any of these, they are very common, unfortunately. So if you think you're not that worried about anything, but you are experiencing most of these, then do get checked out. I think it's something like if you have 3 or 4 of these to the point where it's consistent and affecting your life, then it's possible to get a diagnostic. Sometimes people think you have to tick every single box in order to qualify for a diagnosis. No. It's the same with any like dyslexia, dyspraxia. You can still get a diagnosis for it if you do not cover all the boxes, because the way it affects you is so diverse and broad. Yam said, sometimes I have trouble sleeping and sometimes I sleep for 14 to 18 hours and still wake up tired and feeling depressed. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. And that can happen. It can either be hardly any sleep or a ridiculous amount of sleep. Salia says, with anxiety and neurodivergent conditions, addiction can be a problem too, not just with drugs and alcohol, but sugar as well. Yes, addiction can be anything. It could be addiction to like picking your nails, addiction to overeating. We just normally say alcohol and drugs because it normally has the most devastating side effects, but it really could be addiction with anything. I can assure you my nails speak the truth. Rather than be all doom and gloom, I'd love to know what helps you. So when you are feeling stressed, anxious, kind of built up, what do you do to bring it back down, ground you? Sanjan just said, sleeping and anxiety are connected. You may need help with both. I had sleep CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, but it didn't work alone. Both important. Yeah, do you know what, Sanjan? I think is there one option that works for everyone? No. I always see support and rehabilitation as like a cocktail, unless you're covering from alcoholism. Jokes. It's about, finding the right combination that works for you. Who knows what works? I think just it's trial and error a lot of the time. Doctors aren't actually very good at telling you what's wrong with you, but they are good at telling you what's not wrong with you. Most of the time, they do a process of elimination rather than just hitting the nail on the head. So we've got what steps can reduce anxiety? We've got being out in nature, art, swimming, dancing, reading. I love those. I'm completely on the page for that. Taking time out alone, family hug. I like that. Family hugs are great. For me, walking really fast and really far. I'm completely with you that, but I do it on cycling. I just get on my bike, I just pick a direction and I cycle. Kind of like that scene from Forrest Gump where it's like, I just started running, and I just did not stop. And he just went on forever. Get away from triggers. Yep. Avoid them as much as you can, but not to the point where it becomes an obsession. Breathing exercises. Yeah. Meditation, well-being, Disney films. Great. Yeah. There's always the classics out you go back to. A guaranteed good time.
For me, it's, do you know how tired I am? I go to my local gym and it's a sauna, so I don't have the strength to go to the exercise, but I definitely feel it relaxes me using the sauna and steam room. Yeah, I think there's. But although I use the steam sauna, I still find with my mind racing, I think with ADHD, I still find it hard to get to sleep, and it's hard to tell someone that, and they probably think, what? It probably, after visiting the steam sauna, you have the best night's sleep. It relaxes you. For me, unfortunately, it doesn't, because I still feel tired, and even if I had a good long shower, I still feel tired.
No, Fazana, you're definitely right there. It sometimes problem sleeping isn't just down to not being tired. You could be completely shattered and still not be able to sleep. But going to the sauna steam room is a great idea. Going to the gym, perfect. Looking at cats online, yeah, I do that a lot. There's something about those fluffy marshmallows that you can't help. Dogs, arts and craft, jacuzzi, watching movies. There isn't a right answer for this, but make sure you find time in your day to relax. It's so important. It's not a luxury. It's not like, oh, I don't have the luxury to relax. It's an essential. Can I ask a question while you're still on it? Why is it I can't, after visiting the steam and sauna and the gym, I'm still tired? I think I'm going to get good night's sleep tonight, but then in the morning I'm so tired. Is it because the mind's still racing? That's a really difficult question to answer, and there could be so many things. It could be to do like diet, it could be your head, because you could put yourself in a relaxing situation, but you're still unable to disconnect your mind from those intrusive thoughts. It's like trying to meditate but not being able to forget about that worry you have. I always kind of think of it like a big pattern. So you're worrying about the worry, and the worry worries about the worry, and then it kind of like builds up. So yes, you might be in a relaxing situation and you no longer think you're stressed, but all that stress you've experienced for the last week, month, years is still there. And it can be very, very difficult to break that cycle. I mean, that's not how. Yeah. Thank you. Very helpful. Yeah, very helpful. Now, just some quickly frequently asked questions, which I think will clear some of the misconceptions up, is, does anxiety count as neurodivergent? Well, we have said no, but officially there's no standardized definition of what is neurodiverse. It used to be just autism, now it's expanded, but I would say probably not. However, that doesn't mean that it's not highly related. Is anxiety on the autistic spectrum? Anxiety is not considered a core feature of ASD. So again, you're very likely to have anxiety and autism, but it isn't part of the package. It's not what they look at for the criteria. You can be completely happy and autistic in the right scenario and situations. Are anxiety disorders neurological? So we said they're not neurodivergent, but are they neurological? Absolutely. Neurological is in the brain. Disorders and neurological changes in mood and body function. So if you are anxious or have anxiety disorder, it does have a knock-on effect with everything in your life because it controls the communication signals within your brain. If any of you have experienced anything I said today, please go to the doctors if you think it's something which is ongoing. If it's something which you've already seen support for, you've done what you can, but you'd want support in the workplace, that's when you should get in touch with exceptional individuals. We can't help you on the medical side, but we can help you with in-work support or finding work while having anxieties. Because let's be real, the real world doesn't stop spinning just because we're going through a hard time. It's important to take time out, but some of us might not always have that luxury. So if you are still having to work, maybe there's things that we can do to help ease the pressure. Could be coaching, support, whatever. If that's the case, go on our website, give us a call, and we can always look at having an assessment for you. I mention it every week, but it really, really is a valuable resource. And here are my personal top tips. One, look at adorable gifs of hedgehogs floating in water. Second is focus on what you can control. Have the courage to accept what you cannot change and the knowledge to know what you can, or you know that expression. But there's some things we cannot change in life, and those, nothing you can do about it, but there's things you can. Next, stay connected. Keep in touch with your friends. Do not let them disappear. It's like the worst thing you can do because you are going to need them. Reduce uncertainties. Are you able to find out in advance what's happening? So that's one less thing off your plate. I don't know if any of you noticed, all my t-shirts are just like plain and one color, just because I get really anxious, and keeping it simple is just one last thing off my plate. Maintain perspective, understanding triggers. Sally says, medication has helped with the first. Medication can help, but it's not the best long-term one. Things like CBT, support, coaching are the best, but they might not always help if you're really severe. And sometimes medication can help alleviate that. So like antidepressants, things along those lines. But remember, I'm not a medical professional. Sanjan says, ask the GP for referral to sleep CBT, and counselling. Get on the waiting list ASAP. Oh, Sanjan, you've experienced what I have. The NHS, we love it, but the waiting line for mental health is terrible. If you are bad now, do not wait for it to get like dire. Go and get on that waiting list ASAP. I've been on it for 2 years, and when I have had support, it wasn't great. Not saying you shouldn't get support, but just know, effort.
Can I ask a question? Is sleep therapy, I've heard of it, but I think it's not very common, but can it be provided under the NHS?
I cannot say 100% because I've not received sleep one, but I do know that normal CBT is available, and I wouldn't be surprised if the sleep one wouldn't be, but it's definitely not something they give away easily because I don't know anyone who has received it. If you want to review today, but we have all our other webinars on our YouTube channel, highly encourage it. And if you want to get in touch with me if you have any questions, but you are able to contact us, view our details here. My name's Nat, so nat@accept.co.uk if you want to get in contact, or contact our admin, and we'll always do our best to get in touch and support where we can. So thank you, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed today. It's been a fantastic subject to teach, particularly as a firsthand, someone who experiences it firsthand. Thank you all for being so open and honest with your experiences, and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, same to you. Speak soon now. Bye.
Bye.